This is your Armchair Detective, and today I'd like to tell you about the case of the capsized canoe. Henry Hilton, the popular author, his wife Edna, and his pretty but still efficient secretary, Heather Featherston, were taking a brief country holiday together. You know the sort of thing, hiking, tennis, boating, and plain loafing. Well, after about 3 days, the trio decided on a boating picnic. It was a fine, clear morning as they set out. No hint of tragedy in the limpid air. Yet a few hours later, a highly agitated man was phoning the local police. There'd been an accident on the river. Would they send someone at once? The local sergeant, Smithson by name, was soon on the scene with his one and only constable. A wet and apparently distraught Hilton told the sergeant about the boating picnic, how his wife stood up unexpectedly when they were downstream as far as the old dock and capsized the craft. "We couldn't find her," Hilton gasped. "The stream's pretty fast there. Miss Featherston and I are both strong swimmers, but it took us all our time to reach the bank. All we found of Edna was this hat. It was near the dock, but there was no sign of her." At this he sat down, wringing his hands in anguish. Miss Featherston's account of the accident matched her employer's. The constable, meanwhile, had not been idle, for while his superior had been questioning Henry Hilton and his secretary, he had located the upturned canoe about half a mile downstream from the dock. He'd found it wedged under a low, overhanging willow. Just a few yards further on, he found the body of Edna Hilton. The constable quickly reported his discoveries to Sergeant Smithson, whose face seemed to harden at the news. Turning to Henry Hilton and his secretary, the sergeant said, "I'm arresting you both on suspicion of having murdered Mrs. Hilton." Now, what was it that convinced Sergeant Smithson he had two murderers on his hands? The sergeant may have been just a country policeman, but he was no fool. The mistake that Hilton and his secretary made was a very simple one. Had the drowning occurred as explained by them, Mrs. Hilton's hat would not have been found near the dock. Obviously, the swift-running river would have carried it downstream along with the canoe and the body. You've probably guessed the motive. The author and his secretary were lovers and had planned to get rid of Mrs. Hilton by staging the accident. All of which Hilton subsequently admitted. The callous pair might very well have escaped the consequences of their crime. But author Hilton just had to embroider his story with the fiction of the recovered hat. And that was the last of Henry Hilton's creative work. A few months later, he, together with the pretty but efficient Miss Featherston, were hanged for the crime of murder.